Hi, my name is Mayank Rizada, and I work as a senior director here at Indegene and lead go-to-market and solutioning for clinical and medical affairs offerings. I precisely focus on patient recruitment, real-world evidence, and some PV offerings. With 20 years in industry in strategy management consulting, I spent last decade exploring innovative evidence generation strategies to get biopharma products from to market, including use of real-world data for clinical and regulatory use cases. Today, I'm very excited to invite Melissa Wisner to speak on a topic which has a lot of untapped potential. It's utilizing fit for purpose real world data to accelerate clinical trial success. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Melissa, can you hear me?
I can. Thanks, Mayank. I'm uh, I'm happy to introduce myself here. I'm thrilled to be here with you. I hold a role at Datavant, which is a principal for clinical development solutions. And that just means that I'm lucky enough to use my 20-some also years of experience in clinical development and technical consulting to help life sciences companies drive more efficient trials, optimize operations, and really marry all of that with clinical and real world data insights. Prior to joining Datavant, I held roles both on the sponsor side at Merck Pharmaceuticals and on the technology provider side at Verily Life Sciences, which is an Alphabet company, and Medidata Solutions. So I'm thrilled to be here.
And it's a pleasure. So I think for full disclosure, right? So DataVant and Indegene are strategic partners, and we are exploring use of EMR records, real-world evidence for clinical as well as commercial use cases. Our focus obviously is how we can recruit patients faster and reducing the screen fails. With that in mind, right, Melissa, I really wanted to start off this conversation talking about how real world data and tokenization, which obviously is one of your secret sauces, right, can improve patient finding in a clinical trial construct.
Yeah, I'm very happy to dive into that. If you couldn't tell already, that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I really think about it sort of in my mind in twofold, two sort of sides of the coin. One, with clinical trials in particular, there's both sort of a near-term view of how we can impact trials immediately, and then the longer-term perspective. But maybe before I go there, if I could spend a minute sort of defining tokenization, I think that might be helpful. I think tokenization in general is sort of a ubiquitous topic and concept in many other industries, the finance industry and so on. And now over the past couple of years, it's really becoming well known and even table stakes within life sciences. But maybe not everyone here is as intimately familiar, especially folks from the R&D side of the house. So just to define the term, tokenization is the process of de-identifying data to create a unique patient key, and that's what we call a token. And we do that by removing personally identifiable information, or PII, things like first name, last name, gender, date of birth. And we use that information to create an irreversible site-specific encrypted token for each individual patient, in our case, in our trials. And then we can use that PII or different combinations of PII to create multiple tokens that all link back to that individual patient. And that's a technical aspect that we think about. In some ways, that's the easy part. More importantly, there's also the human aspect, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little later, but that includes thinking about consenting the patient, education and training when we think about the patient, the site, the study team, making sure everybody sort of truly understands the value of what tokenization brings. And that sort of comes back to your original question of how can we use this and linking to real world data to drive more efficiency in clinical trials. And when I think about the data in the trial itself and how we actually manage it in the traditional sense, even earlier than the trial conduct itself, like as we go back to pre-screening data that's used for eligibility, we know that clinical trial data is incredibly siloed, right? Patients are given a subject ID. It sort of means nothing outside of the scope of the trial. And that serves to preserve patient privacy, which is, of course, our whole MO as an organization, but it also limits the ability to link to external data outside of the trial or even reuse that data beyond the trial that initially collected it. So that really highlights the fact that the data from a trial is just one small slice of the patient's sort of health story overall. And we have a lot of blind spots outside of that when we think about doing research and answering important questions around drugs and treatment and assets that are going to help the overall patient benefit as a whole. And so when we think about the historical perspective, patients have a whole history of data from before they enrolled in the trial, um, which in the near term can help us confirm medical history or medication history. Linking to real world data that looks at that history can help to confirm eligibility criteria. And that's sort of that near term view that I was thinking about. It's something Mayank, you and I have talked about quite a bit. And that data is really valuable when we think about finding the right patients for the right study, and especially in difficult to recruit study populations. So that's sort of the way I think about that. The one other thing that I'll mention here is that in sort of the longer term view, real world data linkage can also be really helpful to supplement sort of understanding, contextualizing the study cohort as not only as they were entering the trial, as they were in the trial, as they complete the trial. Um, if we better understand not only the enrolled patient population, but also those that screen failed, that's incredibly valuable as we think about study design and future trials in that same drug or indication. And um, understanding other use cases like prior medication use, diagnosis journey, all of that can be fed into trial simulations for the next pivotal trial and really better understanding just the patient journey as a whole. And then lastly, from the long-term perspective, like much longer term, long-term follow-up, there's so many aspects of a patient's health and life that happen after the activity in the trial completes. So after their end of study visit, that is really could be really important to the trial or the understanding of the drug and mechanism itself. So understanding, monitoring for longer term events like hospitalizations or mortality, follow up on the status of patients that are lost to follow up, monitoring treatment journeys over time, and so on. All of those are really tangible use cases that we think about in linking to real world data that are made possible and help drive cost efficiencies, but also just overarching efficiencies in the trial execution. So maybe I would love to talk a little bit more about a specific case study, if that works for you, Mayank.
Yeah.
There's a really great example of this that we have that we've done in the past, and we have some information here to share. So this case study is really interesting because it pulls together a few of the concepts here that we're talking about, and there's this is an example of a large pharma company, a top five pharma that had experienced in this particular drug and indication a number of gaps in evidence that they wanted to try and fill. So this large pharma was looking to tokenize their rare disease trial. This was a long-term late phase study that was evaluating the safety and efficacy for their treatment for a rare genetic disorder. And the study team was hoping to reduce the burden of data collection while maintaining the patient privacy and integrating real-world data linkage to help facilitate more efficient, patient-centric, and cost-effective trials. And this trial in particular, they implemented tokenization at their trial sites. So during the course of enrollment, the trial sites would present an optional section of the main within the main trial informed consent. And the participants in the study or their patient or guardian, because this trial actually was a pediatric trial, it had pediatric patients as well. They could opt into the generation of their de-identified token. So this allowed the team to then compliantly take a look at what proportion of the participants enrolled in the trial were actually represented in the different types of real-world data that they were thinking about using. So they did overlaps across over 10 different real-world data sources. So they looked at claims, EHR data, lab data, social determinants of health, and consumer data. And they looked across the board to see what level of matching they would find with their specific patient population. So they assessed the overlap percentages, and they found that there was a significant set of overlaps with claims, but not enough overlap for with EHR data, specifically for assessments that they were looking for as part of their research questions. The good news is that the pharma company was using this as a proof of concept to demonstrate the feasibility and utility of tokenization. So they found some of that overlap would be really valuable, even within this rare disease, but not all. And the interesting part is that this isn't sort of the end of that story. They went ahead and decided to use medical record retrieval to try and fill in the rest of those gaps. They were looking for very specialized clinical care data. And while that clinical care data was actually found in the commercially available real-world data, and even in unstructured notes, they could find it, they still didn't have the enough overlap with their patients. So they filled that gap, as I mentioned, by using direct medical record retrieval. They had the patient authorization to go out and pull those records, and that specific specialist data was able to be retrieved, and they were able to fill in the gaps with the specialized clinical care data that they needed. So it was a really interesting sort of example of going from tokenization and linkage and finding some of the data, but not all, and then filling in the rest with medical record retrieval.
I think it's fascinating, right? I think we absolutely feel that, the the doors that obviously tokenization can open, right, in terms of how you can bring different disparate data sources for various use cases, right? The other interesting piece that I really feel in this whole story, which obviously something that we are also working very closely on, right? How getting patients HIPAA consent, right? The consent from patient to get their records and the EMR, EMR records and EHR records, right? What is your take on the pragmatic use cases that it opens up with that consent as part of the clinical journey, like clinical trials and patient journey and all that stuff? But also specifically, if you have seen specific challenges with that process.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that comes up quite often that sort of comes back to that truly human aspect that we were talking about before, that consent is it needs to be informed, it needs to be presented often with a whole other host of elements that a patient needs to consider. And so it does provide, like we have found, if I step back a little bit, that um, getting the consent, at least for tokenization and medical record retrieval, to be presented at the time of the main consent is the easiest to consume for patients. And we found that that gives us the highest level of consent rates, highest opt-in rates that we've found. But what we also found is that education and having really robust, understandable materials for your sites and your study teams to help arm them with the points to talk to patients about is super, super helpful as well. Understanding sort of the benefits of taking this extra step, which is often optional, is super important, and having somebody there that can truly answer the questions and not make it seem like something like a Bitcoin or blockchain, something really unattainable or not easy to understand. We found that that's where we have the highest opt-in rates. So sort of tackling the challenges through really engaging with patients and sites in a deep way is the best way to go about it.
Yeah, thanks for nerding out with me on these topics. Like, I think this is really cool, right? Obviously, this is something that both of us like, right? I guess I wanted to turn to another aspect of what data van does, right? So, it's obvious, right, with this case study, and then folks who understand data van platform and data van's value prop, right? That data van, uniquely sits between multiple data vendors, CROs, sponsors, technology players, and you name it, right? So essentially, you are working across different stakeholders, correct? And I believe like one of the challenges that we frequently hear from our sponsors, right, is the is not just the it's not just the implications of managing all these different stakeholders at the same time, but also the cost piece, right? When you bring multiple data partners, things kind of start racking up, right? So I just want to throw it to you, right? Working on these projects or through your practical experience, right? What are the challenges that sponsors face, specifically when working with these multiple stakeholders, data source providers, data sources, and the vendors? So, what is your take on potentially how you have seen these challenges play out, and what is your sort of insight there?
Yeah, I think you mentioned two of maybe like the top challenges that we often see, and one is working across many different stakeholders, and two is cost. And I think we can sort of in our unique place that we sit here, can sort of I'm sure there's many different implications across all of those different challenges. But one of the things that I could probably boil it down to is that often our key stakeholders don't know exactly what questions they want to answer. And that often ends up ballooning some of these conversations, ballooning the costs, and bringing in sort of an indecision around what we need and what we want from our data sources, that ultimately doesn't doesn't benefit the sponsor itself, or and often requires a lot of turns of the conversation, which is okay. But ultimately, what we found is um, knowing the questions that you want to answer, knowing the data variables that you're looking to get, really helps to sort of tackle that challenge. It helps to refine the requirements. It helps to refine what data sources and data itself that you need, and then ultimately helps to refine the cost that comes with it as well. What we hear often is that sponsors are buying all sorts of data sources, and they don't even know what they're going to do with it, and they start to link it, and then ultimately what the utility of the data that they've bought is not as fruitful as they would expect. So I would say one of the ways to maybe mitigate that is to start by doing a fit for purpose data assessment early on, and think about your integrated evidence strategy overall, for not only for the drug or asset, but also just the questions that you're looking to answer. And doing that fit for purpose data assessment helps you to then refine what you're looking for, and hopefully minimize the extraneous costs that might come with it too.
Beautiful. Um, Perfect. So I think the next thing I wanted to maybe double click on, like, we talked about the operational challenges, managing these multiple stakeholders and kind of, bringing these different sort of perspectives to kind of align in the common direction, right? From more in the tokenization and record retrieval space, right? What are the traditional challenges that you see, right? Working with these different data vendors or trying to get these records right from HCOs and whatnot, right? What is your sort of sense of, like, what is your best practice lessons learned that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, a couple of best practices, just in general, and then yeah, maybe some insights too. Best practices, I would say, overall, the things that we hear most often from the organizations that we work with at scale are to truly engage early. That
Mhm.
is the best possible success rate is when you're engaging your therapeutic area leads, your clinical development leads, and your study teams as early as possible. But not only those key stakeholders, also your regulatory agencies, and your regulatory stakeholders are also very much wanting to engage early. And we sort of hear this across the board, that not only do we want to start early from an operational perspective, but also make sure you're getting buy-in from the regulatory agencies as you're thinking about incorporating this into your overarching submissions and packages. They want to hear from you. They want to talk to you about it. And a lot of the guidance that's come out recently just it implies the early engagement. So for sure that is some of the best practices and considerations. And I think for consent rates, we mentioned it before too, but the presentation of the tokenization consent or HIP authorization at the point of the start of the study, at the point of enrollment, truly drives the highest consent rates that we see. And so, in order to have that in place, we have to be thinking about tokenization early on in the study startup process. And so we definitely recommend thinking about it, incorporating it into your initial protocol, into your initial IRB submission, and thinking about all of that in the initial startup phase. And that said, we often say engage early. Sometimes study teams haven't yet thought about it. They're so busy with other things, which we totally understand, and think about tokenization maybe in the midpoint of their study or closer to the end. And that's okay too. Um, in fact, it's fully possible to implement tokenization after the study's already started. We've done that quite a bit. We just find it's much easier for study teams and the patients themselves to sort of think about it as you're coming on.
Yep, start early, right? That's the word.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, I think I was on the fence whether we would talk about AI, but I guess I think we cannot get away without talking about AI and how you see what are the and it's more like, what is your crystal ball sort of stuff, right? What is that you see in terms of role of AI in context of real world data, tokenization, consents, right? From data vantage point, right? How you are thinking of using uh, the different AI, agentic, LLMs and whatnot, right? So that might be an interesting sort of, last topic that we touch upon today.
Yeah, sure. I think, obviously it's such a hot topic. It is the topic of almost every presentation at every conference that I've been to over the last year. But I would say for us at Datavant, we've been using machine learning AI for things like abstracting unstructured clinical notes. We also use it in our matching capabilities in some of our software pieces of our software platform, and so that's been around for a while, which is great news that it's already helping us to be more automated and more efficient in those practices. If we think forward in the near and longer term future, I think just having better targeting and assessment of data sources across the board. If we think about the data that we're looking at, we don't have a data problem. We have tons of data. It's just fragmented and essentially difficult to parse through. And so using AI for some of those challenges, I think is in our near future. So very excited to see what's coming. We have a number of partnerships with big tech and big data companies, and so looking forward to seeing that come through. I'm curious what if you have any thoughts there too of what you've heard.
Yeah, so I think for us, right? I mean, obviously, as you're aware of, right, we are working. One of the things, like even from a patient recruitment perspective, I think we see AI is kind of playing a pretty pivotal role. We are really expanding this patient finding as one of our core sort of uh, core principles, like how we can really find the right patients at the right time for these trials, right? And that includes working with different technologies. So it's not just about finding these patients, which requires, AI-based technologies and looking at how we can get to these patients quicker. Rare patients, like really finding these needle in the haystack scenarios, right? We are also looking at AI and machine learning in bringing in the data and kind of, looking and modeling this data to see if particular patient is fit for a trial and not. So I think we are looking also to explore AI and use of machine learning in that construct. I know we are pretty much on time now. So first of all, I just want to thank you for spending last half an hour with us, right? And taking us through how DataVant is really tackling this important topic. I'm a big big fan of, like, and I obviously have seen fit for purpose in real and use of real world for regulatory and clinical use cases, and how DataVant is bringing some of these capabilities to the fore is truly exciting. With that, I want to thank you, and obviously I want to thank the audience for staying and sticking with us. But thank you, and we'll hear from you soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.